Adam, alcoholic.
Ralph, alcoholic.
Okay, do we want to do a recap on last week, Ralph?
Oh, you, buddy.
Okay, just welcome to anybody that might be new or just joining us. We've gone through the first 4 chapters up to now, primarily looking at the problem and the solution, starting with the doctor's opinion, the phenomenon of craving, the obsession of the mind, the restlessness, the irritability, the discontentment, and then through these other types of description of alcoholism, where if I don't understand the problem, the solution's not going to work. And part of the problem is, if it's alcohol, the problem is abstinence. But as we go through this, we start to see there's something else going on here. It's almost like the problem is I got a body that can't process alcohol, but more importantly, I have a mind that cannot process reality. So I got a body that can't drink and a mind that has to. And all the way through these chapters, it's starting to describe these ideas. The thing about we agnostics is that thing that Carl Jung had said to Roland Hazard, where he says ideas, attitudes, and emotions that are once the guiding force of these men or women are suddenly cast to one side, and a whole new set of conceptions begins to dominate them. If you look at we agnostics, you'll see the word idea, attitude, which is my positioning towards God, and the belief system, the things that I believe that hold me back from open-mindedness. They are obstacles. So when I go through these questions with a new person, and this is the point of this exercise, the point of this workshop is hopefully to enhance some ideas that might be helpful to all of us working with new people, because that seems to be the point of the exercise, that we can win the confidence of a newcomer where no one else can, where the clergy couldn't do it, the therapist couldn't do it, the drug and alcohol counselor couldn't do it. Another drunk was able to win my confidence. So people ask why we continue to do this. It's to become more effective at being able to do that. So going through we agnostics, very, very simple ideas. And it talks about what an alcoholic is. And it says very simply in the preceding chapters, have I learned something about alcoholism? That's where we're starting. Did they make clear the difference between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic? The person that can stop or moderate given sufficient reason, which is a differentiation from someone that is like us, can't leave it alone. When I honestly want to, I ask a newcomer, did I find I could not quit entirely? It's a critical question. Am I an alcoholic of the hopeless variety? Again, it's a yes or no question. Do I see my hopelessness? Do I see that I have a mind that continues to take me back to drinking? All the way through this, and I start to look at some of these ideas. Must I find a power in and of myself if I see that I cannot stop? Faced with alcoholic destruction or to live on a spiritual basis, this is one of these questions here. It doesn't say faced with alcoholic destruction or quit drinking. It doesn't say go on to the bitter end, blotting up the consciousness of my intolerable situation, or stop drinking. It says find spiritual help. All of these ideas in we agnostics are leading me to a spiritual solution. Why wouldn't they just say stop drinking? And I was told many years ago, AA is really not about not drinking. County jail is about not drinking. What Alcoholics Anonymous is about is learning to live in a state of abstinence and have joy, have relationships that work, learn how to navigate around the drama, learn how to have some kind of spiritual alignment that shows me how to overcome these ideas, attitudes, and the subsequent emotions of that conflict that cause me spiritual pain. So part of the word spiritual is ritual, and these are going to be some of the questions we go through. I always go through these 7 or 8 questions with a new person when they are not drinking. I ask them the bedevilments. When you're not drinking, are you still having trouble with personal relationships? It's a yes or no question. When they're not drinking, are they still having trouble controlling their emotions? When they're not drinking, do they still feel that they're a prey to misery and depression? When they're not drinking, are they still full of fear? When they're not drinking, are they still basically unhappy? Because fundamentally, if they don't answer affirmatively to those questions, maybe they don't need to do the work. My experience going through those questions is if I see I cannot solve that riddle with my education, all the information, all the experience I have, I by default have to come to a spiritual experience. I have to find a power. The last idea in we agnostics, when you really look at it, if you're new, is what you really see is 3 kinds of people. You see the believer, You see the atheist and you see the agnostic. The atheist believes in self, the agnostic believes in self, but he's not sure. The believer believes, but all of those ideas in and of themselves without action continue to leave me in a state of drunkenness. So, Ralph, that's pretty much where we agnostics ends. Hopefully, that I can bring somebody to a place where they see that they need spiritual help. If I can't get them there, maybe they don't need to do the work. But that's really the question I'm left with. If I do not find a power, and what chapter 5 is going to do is it's going to show me how to be rid of the things in me that are blocking me from that power. That old thing about Michelangelo when they said, how did you make the statue of David? And Michelangelo flat out said, I never made the statue of David. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David. And there he was. If you really look at the fundamental theme now in chapter 5, it's going to show you honesty. It's going to show you the things that are blocking us and how to be rid of those things, the self-centeredness, the selfishness, the delusion, the affliction with fear, this faulty relationship with God based on self-reliance. If I can be rid of those, whether I believe or not, I start to come to connect with a power by default. And that really seems to be one of the greatest promises in AA, is to be relieved of the bondage of self. So we're going to look at these manifestations of self and how they block us. Notice the word rid of as we go through this, because it's synonymous with remove in step 6 and 7. And we're going to go through all of that. So, Ralph, I don't know if that helped a little bit, but that's kind of where I see myself coming into this chapter. I am still hopeless apart from divine help.
Right. Ralph, alcoholic. So, Adam, one quick thing before we continue. So when I first started going through the book several times, if I got up at this point and the person still thought that they had enough knowledge now, because up until this point we were provided enough knowledge, about ourselves and about this illness, about this disease, and about the lack of power. Do you continue working on with somebody in this meeting right now that still thinks, so, oh yeah, some of this stuff applies, but maybe not all of it? Thanks for the information. Do you continue working with someone if they want to, or remember we talked about that, or do you
I do. I do. I did it in the beginning because I thought I needed to practice. And as I've continued doing this, I found that quite often people come to believe through a process. Just like the second appendices, when we talk about spiritual experience, and it says a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery, and it talks about that being very much like an educational variety. So sometimes what happens is they start to move towards a second surrender. My experience is people either become more surrendered through this process or less, and we can't tell what that's going to be. Usually worldly clamors distract them and we lose them. But sometimes this guy that's not sure, he comes to scoff, right? And he stays to pray. That's the last statement in the doctor's opinion. I see that a lot working with people. I've never stalled the guy out. If he's willing to meet me once a week or twice a week, I'll take him all the way through. And I guarantee you, he will never be the same.
And if they go through it,
I promise you, you won't be the same. You'll be different.
All right, let's continue. Chapter 5, how it works. Adam, we're going to do that other thing at the end.
Oh, okay.
All right. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. They are such unfortunate. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional mental disorder, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. We turn statements into questions. Have I seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed this path? What path are we talking about? The path of the 12 steps. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not. In all my time in AA, there's never been anything that I cannot do. There's been several things that I would not do, like a 4-step, like, I don't know, I couldn't understand why cleaning the ashtrays is going to help me stay sober, because it doesn't look like it's attached to the problem, of not drinking. So cannot or will not, give themselves to this simple program. And it goes on to say constitutionally, and if you look up the word constitution, it means naturally on your own. Okay. They are such unfortunate. And then if you look to the next paragraph, next sentence, it says, they are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner which demands rigorous honesty. That tells me that naturally on my own power that I'm unable to grasp this simple program, which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average are those two who suffer grave emotional mental disorders. You just think about my own drinking experience. That's me, grave emotional mental disorders. Think about Jim, think about Fred, think about the jaywalker. Those are grave mental. Everyone thinks they're talking about like special needs people in AA, but if I'm a special needs person in AA, when it comes to alcohol, my chances are less than average. And my sponsor used it in an analogy of a capacity of a coffee cup. He says, if you leave a coffee cup out with coffee in it, after a while, it's just going to go bad. It's going to get smelly. It's going to be moldy. But if you take that off and you clean it out, now it has the capacity to be filled with something good. And in our case, it's getting rid of self and getting filled with God. Adam?
That first, there's 5 warnings on these 2 pages. The first one is the warning where it says the people that do not recover. And it says cannot or will not. My sponsor said, are you a cannot or a will not? He had said the same thing. It is my will. And going back to the second half of Bill's story, if I apply what I will not do, looking at the steps that Bill took, looking at him and Lois abandoning themselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping others, will I not help others? And will I not attend meetings frequently? You see steps, meetings, and service. What part of that triangle am I not willing to do? Because it is what I will not do that blocks me. I had quite a bit of like training with psychology, and there's a thing called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual on Mental Illness, and there's 2 basic axes there. The first one is emotional disorders like bipolar, manic depressive, anxiety disorder, and the second one is mental disorders, which are the most difficult, like personality disorders. And what I see now working with people is I've worked with a lot of people that also, like, they drank alcohol for medicine. It was different. They weren't like me. Like, they were in so much emotional pain that when Wilson said liquor stopped being a necessity, a luxury, and became a necessity, for those people, working with people that have grave emotional and mental disorders, I tell them they need to work 2 programs. I do not exclude anybody. I'm not a doctor. And I think that a lot of those people I've seen that continue to work through this process succeed in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is none of my business. I am not a doctor, but I've seen a lot of people that have severe emotional and mental disorders. And if they have the capacity, if you look at the word honesty, it's used 3 times here. Honesty with self. Do I see the honesty that I cannot stay stopped on my own? Am I honest about the fact that I can't stop once I start? Am I honest in fact that I probably need a spiritual experience? I have to have some kind of change in my perception in order to recover. If I can go through these questions with somebody, the word capacity, by the way, is also a legal term. Does that person have the capacity, again, to be honest? Because a lot of people don't. And my sponsor said to me, Adam, you'll step around the podium and tell yourself a lie and then believe it. I'm the one that might be at times incapable of being honest with myself. That's why I need to stay in the center of AA. And I will work through this paragraph again and again with a new guy, because I will eventually tell myself a lie that somehow my career or my relationship is incompatible with my recovery. And all of a sudden I'll be drunk again. My mind will take me back to drinking if I don't stay in the center of this, Ralph. It is critical that I understand what this is saying. Very, very important.
And a lot of times when we're talking about completely give themselves to this simple program, a lot of times by the time we get to this point in reading the book, they're starting to feel a little better. They're starting to think they understand a little about the problem, the new guy you're working with. But he thinks, therefore, I don't need to do the rest of the work. How it says completely gives themselves, not half, not nothing. It talks about half measure to avail us nothing, but completely, all of us, all in. Because for me, when I realized, I had that realization that I'm screwed, that I really am powerless, that my disease attacks me when I'm not drinking the most. I'm 30, 60 days, 90 days away from a drink, and I feel worse. So if that's my, and all the consequences in the world don't stop me from picking up that drink, I am powerless. I'm screwed without this program. I mean, and I have to believe that just as much today as I did when I came in here almost 20 years ago. It says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now, before, what brought us here, and what we are like now. If as a condition, if you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths. When I work with somebody, before I even get to this part of the book, I bring them to this part and I ask them, are you willing to go to any lengths? When we tell them what any lengths is, we're going to meet at least one day a week. When we're meeting face to face, I have them come to my home group if they're local, and we do this deal. Then you're ready to take certain steps. It doesn't say nothing about waiting X amount of time, or one step a month or one step a year. It doesn't say any of that stuff. It says if you decided you want what we have. What made you decide you want what we have? I'm powerless. I need this program. At some of these we balked. They put that balked phrase in there because in Dr. Bob's story, Dr. Bob was balking about doing the amends. He was one of our co-founders. He talks about that in AA Comes of Age. We balked. We thought we could find the easier and softer way. And we discussed some of the easier, softer ways, just going to meetings and not drinking, just going to IOP, just doing anything, anything but really doing the work. But we could not. And that's a question mark. Can you stop without, doing this the easier, softer way? With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. There's 2 times on this page that we're talking about completely, on the top, completely giving themselves to the simple program, and down here, let go absolutely. Adam?
I have the same thing circled: thoroughly, completely, absolutely, any length. All these are absolute statements. They're all or nothing statements. There's no middle of the road in any of these statements. I think that's one of the biggest misquotes, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. It doesn't say that. It says what we were like, what happened to us, because it happens. Life happens. People die. People lose businesses. People get married. People get divorced. How I react to life, the change in my reaction to adversity, to conflict, to resentment, to fear, that change in me. And when people talk about that change, not about the story as much as the symptoms of alcoholism and untreated alcoholism, funny enough, that depth and weight becomes very attractive to new people, because it's very easy to get caught up in the differences. But when we talk about these symptoms, not being able to stop once we start, not being able to stay stopped, the other types of obsessions that we have, the way that alcoholism starts to migrate into other behaviors, it becomes so what I was like, what happened. And these are very, very powerful. We beg of you to be fearless and thorough. What are the old ideas? There's a big difference between the act of surrender that gets the newcomer into AA and the state of surrender that keeps the old timers here. And it's very, very different. It sounds like the same thing, but I start to watch what the state of surrender is and how do I maintain and develop this state of surrender. It's almost like humility plus service equals gratitude, and it starts to become a consciousness of humility. Very, very powerful, because that's what it's going to require for me to do the rest of this work, to stay there. And then Ralph, do you want to continue? Remember, we deal with alcohol?
Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. And we write patient, too, on the top in parentheses. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one, with a capital one, who is all powerful, all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures avail us nothing. There's another reference to being all in. We stood at the turning point. Door A, continue drinking. Door B, live on a spiritual basis. We asked his, with a capital HIS, for protection and with complete abandon. There's the 4th time in a page and a half that talks about completely giving yourself to this program, because it is life or death. It talks about that on page 72, a life or death errand. And then we get into the steps. You want to touch anything before I go over the steps?
There's a lot of ways to look at the steps, and one of them is these 3 fundamental ideas: protected by God, accepted by self, connected to community. Those 3 pillars of recovery. And that statement where it says we ask for his protection and care with complete abandon. If you abandon a ship, you can't get back on it. You go to the ocean with a little cup, you get a cup full of water. You go to the ocean with your whole life. Say, God, take all of me, take my career, my resentment, my fear, my selfishness, take my relationship, take all of it. That first piece to be protected, Clancy used to say safe, sane, and sober. That sense of safety in steps 1 through 3. And then 4 through 7, accepted by self to find out what is blocking me. And then that third piece, connected to community. So 1 through 3, I give it up. 4 through 7, I clean it up. 8 and 9, I make it up. 10, 11, and 12, I keep it up. There is a spiritual idea that runs through this process that through these type of surrenders, I start to develop a relationship with God, with self, and with others. And then I maintain, develop, and grow these relationships in the last 3 steps. There's a lot of different ways to talk about the way these things are lined up and why Bill wrote them the way that they did. We can go through the steps backwards, forwards, sideways, but they all are spiritual laws. They're principles. I was told, there's a principle behind every step, which is one word. Each step in and of itself is a principle, the way it's written right now. So we can read through these, but these are going to become a way of life. They're going to become a design for living. They're going to become a roadmap to spiritual success. And once I've really done 1 through 9, 10, 11, and 12 take on a completely new life of their own, where I can have a mindfulness practice. I can bookend my day with a retiring prayer, an awakening prayer, a contemplative prayer, a petitionary prayer, and then a centering prayer. And then that 12th piece, I have purpose. So the last 3 are power, program, purpose, if I really see what that is. So there's a lot of meaning in these besides just reading them off the wall, Ralph.
Yeah, that's so true. And for a long time, I didn't really give too much credence to just like the one word of the principles. But you could just say, am I being on it? Well, I'll read the step. It says, here are the steps we took, which are suggested of the program of recovery. It's the only suggestion, by the way. 1, we admitted we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And I always say it, and especially if you're new, I admitted I was powerless over alcohol, drunk or sober, and my life is unmanageable. That's just to go at it because, like, what do you mean? I'm sober. How am I powerless over when I'm sober? Well, you always go back to it. But just the honesty of that in step 1. But that transforms to me 20 years later. Am I being honest in all my affairs? Am I practicing these principles? And some of these are these principles. 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And that is hope. And for me, it's came to believe that a power greater than myself could help me see the truth about drinking and drugging. See the truth. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And that's faith. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted that's courage. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Integrity. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Willingness. 7, we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Humility. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Brotherly love. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Justice. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we are wrong, promptly admitted it. Perseverance. 11, saw through prayer and meditation to prove our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Spiritual awareness. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And that's service. And if you've gone through this book and you're not excited about talking about it, my sponsor used to always tell me that you're missing something somewhere along your block, because this is designed by doing those other 11 steps for you to have an awakened spirit where you want to just help people, where you want to pass on this gift of sobriety. Many of us exclaimed, what an order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. You think of adherence, you think of tape, you think of like heavy duty tape stuck to, so no one has been able to stick to these principles perfectly. We're not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. That's one of the biggest misphrased things you hear in the program is progress, not perfection. We're not talking about that. We're trying to strive towards spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. Adam, why don't you recap?
So the last way that I look at it is just like the Oxford group: surrender, catharsis, restitution, and service. Those 4 fundamental ideas in the steps. The word balk that we used in the beginning is a baseball term, and it means to hesitate. And you're seeing that bookend right here where it says, what an order, I can't go through with it. It's something that blocks us from moving forward with these really simple ideas. It's very important that what you said, none of us have been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. I tell people, we're not saints. If you got a halo, don't let it choke you, right? It's like, but I'm claiming spiritual progress. I'm willing to be open-minded to spiritual ideas now. Now, everything that I looked at that was blocking me in we agnostics, I'm going to start to look at what's blocking me and how to start to apply these principles. It's very interesting because this next paragraph, it says our description of the alcoholic, right, to page 44, the chapter of the agnostic, which we just read last week, and our personal adventures before and after. Now, before and after what? If you're new, it's before and after I stopped drinking. So what it's saying is these ideas, drunk or sober. So when I'm drunk, I'm an alcoholic. I can't manage my own life. And the foolishness is to think the unmanageability is because of my drinking. That's a half truth. That's like looking at the broken home, the financial destitution, the failing health, right? The ruined marriage, and thinking that's the problem. Like looking at the tip of an iceberg. In fact, that's what the therapeutic community tells me the problem is. And I'm sitting in my treatment center learning about my triggers. And I'm telling the counselor, waking up's a trigger for me. I'm awake. And what this process is telling me is that for an alcoholic of my type, the trigger's actually on the inside. And if you really look at it, when an alcoholic's not having a good day, when I'm not having a good day, when I'm not getting my way, that's where the use of the will becomes conflicted. It's almost like we're all 5-year-old kids in AA with old people's faces. You don't believe it? Cross one of us. I'll resent you for decades and your grandkids. So I start to see these ideas. So drunk, that no human power can relieve my alcoholism, right? The belief in self-will. And that third piece that God couldn't win his thought. Now plug in when I'm completely sober. I'm sober. Am I still an alcoholic? Absolutely. Am I still having a problem managing those bedevilments on page 52? Am I still a prey to misery and depression? Am I still having trouble controlling my emotions? Am I still having trouble, again, managing my personal relationships? There's the ideas in that second half of step 1 that probably no human power. That means not money, not property, not prestige. There is nothing that I can solve. Like, that's what I'm trying to do now, is trying to solve a spiritual problem with a physical solution. That's the belief system in B. And then C, that God couldn't, would have sought, very much in line with the 11th step. And I see that drunk or sober. So it's very, very powerful. And then it's going to ask me, and you can go if you want, Ralph, being convinced, right, of these ideas. The original manuscript said if you're not convinced of these 3 ideas, throw the book away or reread up to that point. They were very black and white about this.
Yeah. And it's very funny because up until this point, the book has tricked me in reading it because, we talked about the allergy at first and we talked about, the mental obsession. And now we're going to talk about something totally different. What Adam was just saying about how it's our insights. It's about getting our way. And it's really cool how when I went through this, my sponsor said, we assign people roles in our life. When they don't meet up to those roles, we get disturbed, we get aggravated on the inside, which can trigger a mental obsession, which could set off the physical craving. It doesn't look like it should go that way, but it makes perfect sense when it's explained. It says being convinced. Am I convinced up until this point that I'm an alcoholic? I can't manage my own life, drunk or so. That no human power could relieve my alcoholism. Am I convinced of that? Being convinced we're at step 3, that we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And I was taught that turning a will, which is my thoughts, and my life is my actions. It's a simple way for you to do that. A will, like I'm going to have a will, I'm going to leave X amount of money to this person, I'm going to do that. And my life is my actions. The first requirement, here's the requirement. This is all circled and underlined. That to be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. Question mark. Are you convinced up until this point that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success? On that basis, and basis is circled, we'll get back to that. Adam will talk about that. We're almost in collusion with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by a propulsion. And I used my first person in this. Ralph is like the actor who wants to run the whole show and is forever trying to rearrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery for the rest of the players in Ralph's own way. If Ralph's arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as Ralph wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including Ralph, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. And trying to make these arrangements, Ralph may be sometimes quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, and generous, even modest and self-sacrifice. On the other hand, Ralph may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most of us, he is more likely to have varied traits. Basis, Adam. Tell me about basis.
Well, before we do this, what I do is very similar when I work with new people, the actor trying to be the director, but I'll throw in, am I trying to arrange my career, my family, my relationship? So I'm starting to look at it in the relationships that I have in my life. And when I go through this top of page 61, this is how it reads to me. When Adam is getting his way, when I'm getting my way, right? Then I look at it this way. Everybody, including myself, is pleased when I'm getting my way, right? Life would be wonderful when I'm getting my way. When I'm getting my way, right, I'm virtuous. When I'm getting my way, I'm kind. I'm considerate. I'm patient when I'm getting my way, right? When I'm getting my way, I'm even modest and self-sacrificing, right? Now, what happens when I don't get my way, Ralph? Here it is, right? When I don't get my way, I'm mean. I'm egotistical. I'm selfish. Sound familiar? I'm dishonest when I don't get my way, right? So it's very interesting. I start to look at the will because this is where the function of the mind is to think, the function of the body is to act. It seems like the function of the human spirit is will, and my will always choose me. You see? So it is the conflict in my will. This is the immaturity that Harry Tiebout talks about. King baby, His Majesty the baby. Anything that interrupts or harms, threatens, or interferes with my will drives me back into selfishness. It drives me back into dishonesty. It drives me back into fear. And everything here is going to ask me how I can align my will with some fundamental laws. We don't have time to talk about being in collision, but there's a whole thing about this ship on the horizon at night and how it's in conflict with every boat in the channel. And that whole analogy is me trying to align my will with what is constant, and that's God's will. If I can do that, my life works.
And up until this point, we've been running our lives on self-will, on old ideas. Keep reading. I never heard that when I get my way. Keep going.
Well, it's like this. The real quick analogy, and then we'll do the seventh tradition. There's a ship on the horizon at night. It's going across this huge channel, and there's a light approaching the ship. So the helmsman, he's the guy that steers the ship, says, turn your course 10 degrees to the north. And the reply as this light's getting closer is, no, you turn your course 10 degrees to the south. And they're arguing back and forth. The guy that's running the ship, who's steering the ship, replies again and says, we demand you turn your course 10 degrees to the north. The final reply is, I'm a lighthouse. Now, what I don't see as a human being is it is my nature. It is my nature to play God. It's going to tell me now. See, that ship has to know two things. It has to know its nautical speed and its longitude and latitude in order for that ship to change course. And that is what we're going to start to discover in the process of inventory. If I do not understand where I am, I cannot figure out how to get out of this riddle. There used to be a thing, Ralph. Remember the thing called a map? We used that one. Before Google Earth, there was a thing called a map. But there's two things you have to know on a map. You got to know where you're going. But what's more important than that? You have to know where you are. And we're going to get to that in a little bit here. So that's kind of the way. So why am I in collision if God's will is constant? That's the question.
That's what self-will. Matthew, you want to do a seventh tradition, brother?
Sure. Thank you, Ralph. Matthew, alcoholic again, and just wanted to once again bring to your attention that we are collecting for the seventh tradition. We have both a PayPal and an e-transfer that you can use to contribute. Anything that you can do is greatly appreciated, and we donate to the various levels of service. Thank you, guys, and we'll turn it back.
Okay. Continuing on 61, what usually happens, the show doesn't come off that very well. He begins to think that life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself. He becomes, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious. And as the case may be, still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that others are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, and self-pitying. What is the basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? And here's one of the biggest quotes you see in the book. Is he not the victim of the delusion that he could wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? And if you look up the word rest, it doesn't mean like rest like I'm resting. It means trying to finagle, trying to control. And continuing what Adam was talking about, and again, I assigned up until this point in my life different roles for people to play. When they're not acting the way that I want them to act, it causes the disturbance in me. It causes me to become what we talk about on page 52, a little restless, a little discontent, a little irritable. Things aren't going my way, and then eventually when that happens, my magic magnifying mind all of a sudden will say, I know what could fix this. And boom, suddenly the thought crosses my mind. Suddenly the thought crosses my mind that a drink will make me feel better. And it gets me fixed real quick. And it works much the same way that the steps work from the inside. The alcohol gets into our body and it changes my perception. And for many years, I drank to live in that perception. Adam, go ahead.
Where are we? Are actors self-centered? Is that where we are?
Victim of the delusion. Is he not the victim of the delusion? Midway through on 61.
Okay. Well, did you stop? I don't know where you stopped. I'm sorry.
All right, isn't that evident to all the rest of the players that all these things he wants, ? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not even at his best moments a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Bottom of 61.
Got it. Okay. Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call him nowadays. There's 4 characters that are going to come up here. Each one of them has a delusion. And the retired businessman who's lolling in the Florida sunshine in the winter complaining of the sad state of the nation, right? He's the finger pointer. The minister who's sighing over the sins of the 20th century, he's the one that's holier than thou. And the reformer who are sure all would be utopia if the world would only behave, and the outlaw safe tracker, he's the victim. All 3 of these characters have one thing in common. They all have the delusion that if people, places, or things would change, they could be happy. This is where all of these characters suddenly have this one thing in common, that they want to arrange life to suit themselves. It is the core of self-centeredness. It is another further description of the actor trying to be the director. He's reinforcing those ideas now in 3 different ways. Who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and locked up. Whatever our protestations or arguments, aren't most of us concerned with ourselves? We don't think much of ourselves, but we're all we ever think about, right? Even the selfishness is the selfish concern for the well-being of others, but it's selfish. You see, it's very important that I see that. Whatever our protestations, are we not concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity? Now it's going to say what the problem is. He says selfishness, self-centeredness, that is the root of Adam's trouble, or whoever you're working with. Have him put that into first person when you're working with somebody. Am I driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity? Do I step on the toes of my fellows, and do they retaliate? Now, one of the things I think is really important here is when I go through inventory, I show people how to pull the 100 forms of fear out of their inventory. They cannot see it without the questions. That's why a person can write an autobiography for a 4-step. There's only one problem. They already know their story. What this inventory process, the way it's designed, resentments, relationship, conduct, and fear, is going to ask me some specific questions about those three ideas. Resentments, which is my attachment to old ideas, my fears, my faulty relationship with God based on self-reliance, and my relationship conduct as it pertains to my expectations and need to play God. If I can ask these questions in this area, what's going to happen is I'm going to extrapolate the 100 forms of fear, the 100 forms of self-delusion, the 100 forms of self-pity. And I'm going to see how I step on the toes of my fellows. Really, expectations or resentments under construction. It's a very simple way to say it. And how I take poison and hope the other person dies. We've all heard this stuff in meetings, but until I really see it in each instance in my life, it's not going to apply to me. It's only, I'm only concerned with things that are about me. It's when someone harms, threatens, or interferes with my will that suddenly I attach a value to it. Right?
Yep. And talk about the difference between branch and root, because it's the root is the deep, what you're talking about below the surface.
Right, exactly. And it is the core, it is the center, it is that from which all character defects are driven. And most of it really is, in my experience, self-centered fear. It drives it. It's either fight, flight, or freeze. And that's how I react to it. Right? Fight is resentment. Flight is fear. Freeze is dishonesty, camouflage. Right? Really look at it. These are very, very basic limbic brain type of ideas. Right? Normal people are intellect over emotion. They think, they process, and they act. Alcoholics and addicts are emotion over intellect. We act, process, and then think. Oops, 10th step. I mean, we're the only people that burn bridges ahead of us. That's why it's saying here, unless I can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of my recovery. So I have to get to the root of it. And this is the core of it. And then it says, driven by 100 forms of fear, we step on the toes of our fellows. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but invariably, that means every time, okay, I find it sometime in the past I made decision based on self, which later left me in a position to be hurt, right? It's kind of like I met her in rehab. I can't believe she drank. That's delusion. I knew he was a crackhead. Can't believe he stole my iPhone, right? I knew he was spiritually sick, but I stayed in the business with him anyway. Somehow I'm going to start to see how I paint the red flags green and then put myself in a position to be hurt. It's very, very simple when you go backwards and see how you place yourself in this, but I cannot see that unless I do it through inventory. And once I've done it, I can never unsee it. I can never play victim again. I can still do it, but now I'm a volunteer.
One of the best sentences in the big book. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. And that's circled, underlined, highlighted. And when we got to this point, my sponsor said, that's the most important sentence in the book for you. I'm like, why is that? He says, that's because you don't have to worry about your family changing, her changing, your boss changing, everyone else changes. That's the problem. They arise out of Ralph. And Ralph is an example of extreme will self-run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything else, we alcoholics must be rid of selfishness. We must, or it kills us, and God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of getting rid of self without his aid, with a capital H. Many of us had moral physiological convictions galore. Did you have these things? My family sent me, to church, to rehab. Not to rehab. I went to court, sent me to rehab. To drinks. I grew up a certain way. I grew up, with certain beliefs, but that didn't stop me from, going down the path I did. Or more importantly, I was able to change the path that I was on my own. But Ralph could not live up to them, even if he would have liked to. And that's, again, I referenced the thing where it talks about, how you can tell an alcoholic's lying, his lips are moving. There were so many times that I wanted to stop, that I didn't want to do the behavior again. When I'm telling my uncle, who was the only person who would help me, I stole this camcorder, that I'll never do this again, that I on myself didn't have the needed power to keep that promise. That wasn't, it was up until that point, I was powerless. I was out of gas. I didn't know what I didn't know, though. We had to have God's help. It goes on to by wishing or trying on our own power. And you could use willpower, We had to have God's help. Adam?
This is the how and the why of it. First, we had to quit playing God. And I have to start to see how I play God. Some of this inventory is going to actually reveal to me being the actor, trying to be the director. That is the conduit of me playing God, being invested in the outcome. Okay. It didn't work. Do I see that it doesn't work? Do I see that I'm selfish and self-centered? Do I see my self-will, that I'm self-will run riot? Do I see that? Do I see that that is the fundamental core of my suffering, that it is causing me spiritual pain? Okay. Next, we decided, now here's where the relationship's going to start to change. Next, we decided hereafter in this drama life, God was going to be our director. Okay. He is the principal. We are his agents. Now, it's not asking me in that third step to make a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as I define him. It's asking me as I understand a working relationship. That working relationship I see now is God will steer, but God won't row. That I start to develop an idea of direction, wisdom, and power, that I'm drawing towards that. It says, he is the Father, we are his children. Most good ideas are simple. This is a concept, it says, which is the keystone. It is another one of the Masonry, Freemason terms: keystone, cornerstone, arch through which I walk. It says, the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. This is a promise. What do I do? And it talks about different relationships with God. And then these are going to become the promises here. It's very interesting because we've gone through a whole, we must or it kills us, that self-centeredness, very, very powerful. The word rid of showed up twice there. Do you want to read this third step promises, Ralph, or should we stop?
That'd be a good space to end. We could just pick up on 4. No?
Go ahead.
All right. When we took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer, being all-powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a firm footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans, our designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt a new power flow in, we enjoyed peace of mind. As we discovered we could face life successfully. As soon as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. And, it says if we stayed close to him and performed his work well. Up until this point, I'm not close to him yet. So it's a direction that, my sponsor took a pipe and said, okay, here you are, and here God is. In the middle is a bunch of stuff that we're going to get connected. It's the direction. If we stayed close, if is a condition. So that means it's going to be followed by more work. If you guys want to unmute, we could do a third step prayer all together and we could take some questions, Rodney, or.
That would be good.
Fine by me. Let people unmute. Go ahead.
Okay. Nice. We're now, many of us said to our maker as we understood him. Everybody?
I offer myself to thee, build with me, do as thou wilt. Believe in the bond yourself, that I will take away my difficulties, heal and bear witness
thy power, thy way of life. May I do thy will
always.
That went well.
Notice it didn't say amen yet. It says amen at the end of the seventh step. And before I usually read this with a newcomer, I will go read the next paragraph first. It says, we found it very desirable to an understanding person, such as our right best friend or spiritual advisor, but it's better to be found alone than one who might be misunderstood. The wording, of course, was quite optional as long as we expressed the idea, voicing the reservation. This was only a beginning. Well, honestly, made effect sometimes at once. There's the reference to the beginning again, which talked about in Jim's story. It says he made a beginning. We're talking about. Next week we'll continue on the bottom of 63, but we have a couple minutes for some questions.
Yeah, Angela has a question if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Does that work?
Yep.
I'm in my car. Okay, so this is a question for Adam. Hi, Angela, alcoholic. Thank you for your service. On page 59, you were talking about the steps, and you were saying 1 through 3, I give it up. And then could you redo that part for me? So I could
4 through 7, clean it up. 8 and 9 make it up. 10, 11, and 12 keep it up, which are the growth steps.
Keep it up. Okay, thanks so much.
Sure.
Keep it up. Thank you.
It's just a simplistic way of trying to understand the point of these ideas. It's more detailed, but that would certainly help me to understand the fundamentals.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Any other questions that we have?
I sort of have a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I'm also in the car. Sorry, Lynn, alcoholic. You know, when you're talking about that we're always trying to control and manage, and on the one hand we can be sweet and kind and all that to get our way, and on the other hand, if we don't, we can be the other. The part about being, you know, sweet and all that, I recognize that as a technique I use, and except I didn't know it was a technique, and but clearly there was a wanting a result type thing behind it. How do you how do you sort of separate out going forward trying to be considerate and sweet and kind from the management part when you're always going to want some kind of result? I get a little confused there. I mean, I know the overall idea, but I'm not sure. Did you understand that at all?
Yes, I think the concept I've heard before is difference between a demand and a desire. That, like, it is the outcome that I have this investment in, that the ideas, attitudes, and emotions. This is where the demand is attached to the emotion. Whereas over a period of time, I start to relinquish that control. I can do the footwork. I can be kind, as long as my motives are honorable. I'm going to be asked later on about motive in inventory. Is my motive to be helpful, to be kind, or is it selfish and self-centered? Is my motive selfish?
Gotcha. Okay,
So
that's
I think those are critical ideas when I'm really coming from a place of love and a spiritual idea. Like, is my motives helpful to all? Is it a win-win situation? You know what I mean? I come from a place, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it helps me to relinquish control is the word. Relinquish.
Thank you. Yeah.
Wendy, do you want to, got a couple of minutes here? Would you like to ask a question?
I would, to Ralph. Ralph, when you were saying the steps, I was in the middle of a crisis of a bunch of alcoholics trying to have their first face-to-face meeting after COVID. After COVID. I mean, they're letting us in, and so I was in the middle of this crisis, making sure people could hold this meeting tonight. Finally, face-to-face, yay! And I missed when you were going over the steps. I caught you at 4, which was courage, and 5, integrity. But I missed 1, 2, and 3. If you could just go over that briefly.
1 was honesty. 1 was honesty. 2 was hope, and 3 was faith. And they apply in all the steps, and your life, Am I practicing being honest? If I'm honest half the time, it doesn't make me an honest person. If I'm kind half the time, it doesn't make me a kind person. Am I being honest? And you could ask yourself that everywhere you go and what you do. And back to the other lady's question, I think that we're talking about as far as being so married to the result that I'm destroyed if the result doesn't go my way, whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with having a plan and wanting to accomplish things in life. And if it doesn't go your way, we have to be able to deal with that in a healthy way, not have a resentment, not feel you're ripped off, not think, well, I did this and I didn't get this. Alcohol, maybe other people could do that, but me as an alcoholic, I can't do that. I can't live like that. Fred?
Fred, alcoholic. Thank you for a great meeting. How do I know if I'm on step 6 right now with my sponsor who's on with us as well? How do I really know if I'm entirely ready to to have my higher power take away all my character defects?
difficult question. It's a difficult question. I look at 6 being doing things that are causing me spiritual pain, and 7 not doing things that are opening the door to freedom. I am looking at these things coming out of inventory. Are they objectionable? There's 3 or 4 ways to look at 6 and 7. I put down the drink, I pick up the fork. Gluttony, put down the fork and pick up the credit card. Greed, put down the credit card, start acting out in the rooms. Eventually, I'm going to hit my knees with all of these. Not everybody, but some more than others. And am I, again, trying to solve a spiritual problem with a physical solution? Do I see at some point that these are causing me shame? I don't know until I go through inventory what those are. There's a lot of different ways to look at 6 and 7, but it is things that are causing me pain. I have to look at that. I don't think they're like, if I look at pride, I'm going to look at humility. If I look at anger, I'm going to look at temperance. If I look at greed, I'm going to look at charity. If I look at lust, I'm going to look at chastity. I am asked to look at the virtue and admit and acknowledge that virtue in 6 and 7. Selfishness, selflessness, dishonesty, honesty, fear, purity, resentment, love. Okay. I'm looking at each one from both sides. I can't work on it. I got to go to God with this stuff. They say God doesn't give us more than we can handle. It's BS. If that was true, I wouldn't need God's help. Most of us are brought to our knees in 6 and 7. It may not happen right away, but we will be brought to our knees at a casino, or, there's a lot of different ways this can happen, but it will happen, especially with pride, with power, with execution at work, right? In our family life, in our homes, occupations, and affairs. That's where Bill says these are going to happen. Our boss, right? Our family, our relationships. You'll see it, and then we can help you with it.
Yeah, and then, coming out of 5, you see all that stuff that's objectionable to you. It talks about it in the 12 and 12 in the 6th step. It talks about being granted perfect release from alcohol. Then why aren't we giving the perfect release in these other areas of our life which are blocking us, which are these things, which are the defects that you and your sponsor worked out? It says the real answer may lie in the mind of God. This is the riddle of our existence. And that's what Adam was talking about, that sometimes we put down the bottle and pick up the gambling. We put down the bottle and pick up other things, which cause us pain or discomfort because they're blocking us from our higher power and another way of living, which is unbelievable. But it doesn't, a lot of times doesn't cause us that much pain that it's worth like giving up totally. Like, so, do we want to be totally honest? Well, I like you to think that I'm totally honest, but I still want to get that business deal. You know what I'm saying? And so you just have to know that the process works. And if you continue to do this, I know it will happen. You'll have a spiritual experience and your life will change. When I always read the 12th step when I'm working with a guy, first, this is what we're going for. A spiritual awakening has the result of these steps, all of them, and 6 and 7's in there.